Cersei's had a bit of a roller coaster ride throughout the series of Game of Thrones. She's always been one of the series' top villains, seeing how she's managed to remain at the top of the pecking order throughout the entire show. People love to hate Cersei, and thanks to Lena Headey's having lots of meaty material to sink her teeth into, she's been able to craft a perfectly loathable character. But something happened between seasons 6 and 7 of Game of Thrones. She went from being a character I enjoyed hating as a great villain into something I really just hated. It was a slow transition, but there are a few key things that were changed in the show that went from making her into a great villain into much more of an obnoxious character who seemed to win despite her numerous failings and shortcomings. So join me now as I dig into why I really hate Cersei, but not in a good way. I've hated other villains like Ramsay Snow or Tywin Lannister. You gotta love Cersei, gotta back it. Love Cersei, don't you grab it. So if there was one character that really benefited greatly from their transition from the book into the TV show, it was Cersei Lannister. Lena Headey got a great amount of very rich material to sink her teeth into, given the fact that she's largely been relegated to genre movies like 300 and Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. She seemed to relish the chance to play a more meaty character, and she does a great job at humanizing Cersei, especially in additional scenes added to the TV series that make her much more sympathetic than the largely monstrous and spiteful character that she often comes across as in the books.
You always hear the terrible ones were terrible babies. We should have known. Even then, we should have known. It's nonsense. Whenever he was with me, he was happy. And no one can take that away from me, not even Joffrey.
But one of the defining aspects of Cersei is that she's not quite as smart as she thinks she is. She feels she should be ruling and be the true heir of Tywin to lead the Lannisters and Westeros forward, but because of her gender and the largely patriarchal culture of Westeros, she will never be allowed to attain that power. The best she can hope for is to become a broodmare, used as a political marriage bargaining chip for her father, which she begins to greatly resent. But Tyrion and Tywin and Jaime all recognize on some level that she should never be allowed to rule, because she's taken all of the worst lessons from her father without picking up any of the finer points of politics. Tywin can be harsh, but he is never excessively cruel. He always gives people who are insubordinate the opportunity to bend the knee and submit, knowing that even kindness and forgiveness can be their own weapons of political power. Tyrion understands this, and so does Jaime, and that's half the reason Jaime never bothers to try and take up any of the higher position of power. He's smart enough to understand how the game is played, and smart enough to realize that he doesn't have any interest or patience for it. But the only lesson Cersei knows about ruling is to have complete power to lash out at her enemies and sow fear and discord amongst them, which decent for the short term, but ultimately is a terrible way to try and rule over things for a long period of time. She is a raging wildfire, burning and consuming just about anyone who gets in her way, and we see this when she finally gets power after Tommen becomes king and he is merely a puppet while she rules as Queen Regent. She despises Margaery Tyrell's growing influence after she marries Tommen and seeks to usurp her, because Margaery is much better at using the tools of her station to rule than Cersei, and it drives Cersei insane to the point where she can't focus on anything else besides coming up with a way to overthrow her. She hates how Margaery's tools of compassion and kindness and doing charitable work for the poor manages to actually make her beloved by the people. To get rid of Margaery, Cersei even goes as far as reinstating the Faith Militant so she can send them to punish her and ultimately remove her. Of course, this manages to backfire spectacularly, but because she is so narrow-sighted, all she can think of are the short-term benefits and not the long-term consequences, where they will eventually turn against her, and she comes to the horrible realization that she put the High Sparrow in a position of power that she can't remove him from, as he forces her to do the walk of shame. But then things change a bit. This outline largely follows the story seen in the 4th book, A Feast of Crows, and then without any new material to draw upon, the showrunners took things in a different direction for Cersei. This new direction ties into a great deal of the criticism that Game of Thrones have been receiving as being not inclusive enough and being too mean and misogynistic with its copious amounts of sexposition, where we'd get large exposition dumps interspersed with sex scenes to keep the audience from getting bored. For a time, the show was able to brush off these criticisms, but as it grew in popular culture prominence, the cries began to grow louder and louder as the Game of Thrones think pieces became a general cottage mill industry, with online publications competing against each other to see who could come up with the hottest take. And the series also ran into a bit of trouble with things like the controversial scene between Cersei and Jaime, where they had sex over Joffrey's corpse, and Cersei never gave any verbal consent, which created a firestorm of debate over whether we'd seen a rape scene or not. As the two showrunners ran out of stories to adapt into the series, they were forced to take on more creative liberties with the source material, and they sought going forward into seasons 6 and 7 to see if they could rectify the criticisms of misogyny that had been thrown at the series. The best example I can think of is the very concerted PR marketing effort that was in the Entertainment Weekly cover series about the 6th season, which called it Game of Thrones, which proudly showcased all of the strong female characters that trumpeted how we'll see them rule from this point forward as they become the women on top. This transition promised to give more to Cersei after her infamous and controversial walk of shame. Now, this is where I take a bit of issue, and I think it's a trend that we see far too much in liberal-focused media criticism, where people seem to think that depictions of racism or misogyny are also endorsements of it. The core appeal of Game of Thrones has always been taking the grit and grime of the Middle Ages and smearing it on the gilded myth of Tolkien-esque fantasy. That's what made people like the series in the first place. That's how a show with dragons and walking skeletons and elves that shoot magic fireballs was able to make its way onto the network that was built by Tony Soprano. All these elements had to be built up to and were largely hidden by focusing on the gritty sex and violence, and the universe of Westeros is ultimately a patriarchal culture that generally does not treat women well. But despite that, there have been lots of great female characters like Arya, Brienne of Tarth, Daenerys, Olenna, and even minor characters like Margaery Tyrell, who was an absolute nothing in the book, got expanded and given much better, meatier material. But Cersei also got swept up in this wellspring of medieval feminism as well. Yes, Queen! You're the best! You do you, girl, and rule over everything! And you see it in her biggest signature moment in the 6th season, where she uses wildfire to blow up the Sept of Baelor and destroy all of her enemies in one blow. And everyone was cheering for this. All those Tyrells and that evil Bernie Sanders priest guy was finally getting theirs, and is the real Yas Queen of Westeros got to rule over all. And she doesn't even grow her hair back. She rocks a bitchin' butch look of short hair. She goes from wearing regal gowns to wearing badass armor. She finally takes the throne of Westeros like she deserves. But I hate this, because it puts her in a final villain status, and it's a status that, quite frankly, she does not deserve. Because there are a few rules that govern Westeros. Westeros is a mean, cruel patriarchy that runs on a very, very literal rape culture, but as mean and cruel as it might seem, it is not a universe that rewards stupidity. One of the better minor villains from the book is Roose Bolton, who's much more interesting in the book than he is in the show. What makes Roose Bolton so fun as a villain is that while he has tendencies that make him just as cruel as his bastard son Ramsay Bolton, he understands the necessity of keeping his kingdom happy and content, that ultimately he should always be afraid of his subjects because that fear is what keeps him sharp. He believes that the fact that Ramsay shows no fear is not a good sign at all, and the one thing that will ultimately get him killed. You should always be afraid. This exchange from the book between Roose and Ramsay explains it best. People fear you. Good. You are mistaken. It is not good. No tales were ever told of me. Do you think I would be sitting here if it were otherwise? Your amusements are your own, and I will not chide you on that count, but you must be more discreet. A peaceful land, a quiet people. That has always been my rule. Make it yours. So despite being a monster who considers it a mercy to hang people instead of flaying them alive, a monster who practices the banned tradition of the first night where he sleeps with any commoner who gets married, he is still ultimately a smart monster who understands that if word gets out about his activities, there would be dire consequences, which makes him a great villain because, at least for me, and I'm sure a bunch of you out there, what makes for a fun villain to root for is a villain who's good at their job and effective at being a villain, as opposed to someone who's needlessly cruel and dumb and ultimately ineffective in the long run. That's what makes Roose a fun character in the books, despite all of the awful things he's done. But the fact that Cersei murders a major house, as well as the head of the Church of the Seven, and also manages to get away with destroying a critical religious monument like the Great Sept of Baelor without any larger political repercussions, just feels like bullshit. The Game of Thrones is a game that rewards power, but it does not reward stupidity, and the fact that we, the audience, are just supposed to accept Cersei's actions of letting her rule without any greater kind of consequences just feels false. As Tywin said before, it's not that he doesn't trust her because she's a woman.
I don't distrust you because you're a woman. I distrust you because you're not as smart as you think you are.
But because she's not as smart as she thinks she is, and as fun as it can be to see her on a vengeance murder spree against folks like Ellaria Sand by chaining her in a dungeon and seeing her daughter die, it feels kind of unearned that she gets everything she wants with little political repercussions, given that the Lannister gold mine has run out, and people should absolutely hate her, and the other lords should have next to no reason to trust her.
Loras rots in a cell because of you. The High Sparrow rules this city because of you. Our two ancient houses face collapse because of you and your stupidity. I wonder if you're the worst person I've ever met. At a certain age, it's hard to recall. You have no support. Not anymore. Your brother's gone. The High Sparrow saw to that. The rest of your family have abandoned you. The people despise you. You've lost Cersei. It's the only joy I can find in all this misery.
But still, she gets final villain status and heaping helpings of plot armor as we get a neutered, much less interesting Euron Greyjoy, who has an army of ships that are capable of using fast travel on the map screen to go anywhere they want, whether it's capturing Yara Greyjoy's ships or appearing just in time to burn Daenerys' fleet of Unsullied to keep them stranded at Casterly Rock while her army goes and claims Highgarden. And it's here where it feels like the rules of Game of Thrones that we've been built up over the course of several years of expensive television are being broken just so we can have our false "Yas, Queen" moment for Cersei, which doesn't feel earned at all. And that's why I really hate Cersei, not because I hate her in a good way, as a good villain should encourage that kind of hatred and loathing, but because I hate the fact that it feels like the game is being intentionally broken to prop her up in a position she doesn't deserve because she never did anything crafty to earn it. It doesn't feel as masterfully mean as Tywin Lannister's Red Wedding, which managed to decapitate the leadership and resistance of the North by eliminating the Starks and replacing them with the Freys and Boltons. There was nothing smart about blowing up the Sept of Baelor. It was pure spectacle and not as tactical as the series has shown us before. Cersei isn't as smart as she thinks she is, but she's being treated like a tactical genius because the board keeps on rearranging in her favor, and she's got a load of die given to her by Benioff and Weiss in order to combat a few whiny think pieces from the Huffington Post, and it goes against everything we've seen before in terms of how things are supposed to work in this world. And that is why I hate Cersei, but not for the right reasons. Hope you enjoyed this video. A very special thanks to the Pixel Hipster who edited this and volunteered to help put it together. Give him a special thank you by subscribing to his channel. He's edited videos for me before, and I've tried to thank him for his hard effort by getting him to 1,000 subs so he can get that sweet, sweet Google ad money. We are more than halfway there, so if you like this video, more importantly than subbing to this channel, go to sub to his channel because he needs all the support he can get. So go support him, sub to his channel, let's see if we can get it to over 1,000 subs. There will be a link to his channel in the description below, as well as in the end screen annotations. So either click the end screen or go to the description below. Hope you enjoyed this video. Tune in next Sunday for the next video in my series of A Month of Ice and Fire. I'm also going to be running my very first panel at the Castle Point Anime Convention on April 27th next weekend. I have no idea how many of you live in the New York, New Jersey area, but if you want to see me live with a special video, which I will not be showing anywhere else, come to my panel at 11 a.m. I hope to see you there and see me at the Castle Point Anime Convention. Special time to see your favorite lobster-themed YouTube video essay personality in the flesh. So if you can make it, come on over.